Hi guys, we are down here in the basket shop today and we're working on building our version of a fruit basket or hamper. I have an older one over here, I'll show you in a minute, but these type of baskets, hampers, were generally used for produce, different things. Where we come from, they were generally used for things like tomatoes, grapes, things like that when they were picking them. And it's going to end up looking more or less like this one right here. So it's got quite a bit of taper, which made them easy to stack. A lot of the older ones actually did not have this double layer, so it would have actually had gaps in between. But we're doing it this way, and again, I'm going to show you some of the older ones here in a minute. But I just wanted to show you how we got started on this one. We actually, on most baskets, we start from the bottom and work our way up. And we tried that with these, but we actually decided to do them from the top down was the best way to do them. So what I've done so far is I've put our top hoop on our form here. The hoop is made from maple. It's a lot harder wood and it works better for bending. It bends a lot easier than the cherry, which is what we call these standards. And this is cherry, and this is actually some of the veneer we cut on the veneer mill at last year's tractor show, and I'll also throw a little bit of footage of that in here. We cut them on that mill and use the clipper to cut them in these pieces that are about 2 inches wide, and that's what we're using for these upright pieces. So what I'm doing right now, and this is cheating just a little bit, ordinarily you would just, well, depends on the type of basket obviously, but you would typically just go through and put the pieces in as you are putting the second hoop on and hold them in place and tack them in place. What we're doing to make things a little bit easier, since we are actually doing this double layer, is I'm going through and I have glued each of these pieces on, and then I'm going back through and I'm gluing the second layer on, and then I will come back and do the top hoop to hold everything more securely. So the glue is really just temporary to kind of keep them in place while I get to the hoop. So to make this easier, there has to be an even number of standards on so that when we push it all together, they will overlap correctly. So to make things a little bit easier, what I've done is I've gone around on my form and I put marks evenly spaced around it. So the first layer of standards, there were 14 evenly spaced around it. That's how I could keep my spacing correct and everything. And now I'm just going back through and putting the second layer, which is overlapped just a little bit. You can see we've got them lapping like between 1/4 inch and 3/8 of an inch on each side for that second layer. So I'm going to go through and finish up here, and then I will show you what our hooping looks like. Using the hot glue because it, of course, will cool and hold very quickly, rather than using something just like liquid wood glue. We've also got these standards pre-cut to the correct length, which in this case is 14 3/4 inches. And as soon as that one is dry, I can move on to the next one. I want to make sure I'm basically splitting the difference of the gap on this end, and then I do the same thing on the bottom end. Just kind of hold it and make sure it's about even on each side, so that way I know I'm getting them relatively straight. When I'm doing the first layer, I of course don't have standards there already to compare to, so to get them straight, what I actually do is I make sure I'm holding the standard flat because they have a little bit of twist to them sometimes, and I just hold it and line it up and make sure it's about straight with our rod there in the middle, and that's how I gauge that to make sure those are straight in the first place. May notice there's some variation in width on the standards, and so therefore there's sometimes a little bit of variation in the gap that we're covering, which is why, you know, some of them overlap so much more than others. That is just because there's some variation in width on those standards. There's a little bit of variation in the thickness too, just because of the machines that we use to cut it aren't as precise as some of the other veneer mills and stuff that we would use for some of our other baskets, where uniformity is more important. In this case, it's not a big deal. Another thing you might notice is on the maple, on our hoop there, of course has a different color than the cherry, which you would expect. It's a lot more white, whereas the cherry obviously has that reddish color. And another thing is this one here, you might notice is a lot more white, and it is cherry. But the reason it's lighter is because it's in the sap wood from the outside of the log, and when you get further into the log, into the heartwood, excuse me, is where you start to get the darker cherry color. So that's why there's that little bit of variation in that color sometimes. And just about done with this. I'm gonna put our last standard on here, and then I can move on to hooping it. As I said, the hoop is made from maple, and maple does bend a lot better than cherry, but in order to do that well, it does need to be soaked. In fact, the logs, when we are going to turn the logs for veneer, have to be soaked. They don't just have to be soaked. All of the logs want to be wet when you turn them, but maple specifically has to be hot also. So we actually put them in a big cooker. We have a big setup with one tank on top of another tank, and we build a fire in the bottom one, and we have the top one filled with water. And when it's a day that we're going to turn a log, we actually put the log in the water, or we would usually do 2 or 3 at one time. Put them in the water, then we would build a fire under it, and we would cook them in this big cooker all day. And they have to reach a temperature of about 190 degrees, 200 degrees. And that will help. Of course, it takes a while, of course, to get that heat all the way through a log, because the log's pretty big. But what that does is it helps loosen up, relax the fibers in the wood, so that when it will come off the log, you can lay it flat and then clip it and use it more readily. And if you did not do that, it would really want to curl back up. You wouldn't be able to work with it as well. Same kind of thing with when we're actually using it. When we're going to use it for a hoop, we need to soak it. Today I'm just using cold water. We're not trying to bend any sharp corners or anything, since we're just doing a round basket. No big deal. In fact, I could probably get away with doing it dry, but it does work more easily when it's wet. But for baskets where we're going around square corners, we're trying to make a sharper bend, we actually usually soak those hoops in hot water as well to make that go a little bit more smoothly. So we always clip the ends off because they are a little bit dark. So clip that off. And then one of the things that I need to be careful with when I'm starting the second hoop is, you see right here is where the first one was overlapped, about 6 inches worth there, where it was overlapped. And I want to make sure I'm starting on the opposite side of the basket from that, so that I'm not nailing through, 5 thicknesses of veneer. Instead, I'm just going to have one single thickness here, so it will be a little bit thicker there. I will have to use a little bit longer tack, but not nearly as much as if I was trying to double them in the same place. So I'm going to spin it around so that that spot is on the bottom, and I'm going to start up here. Going to do my best to show you the tacks that we use. I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to zoom in without it getting fuzzy. But these tacks come in different lengths, but they are cut tacks. And I don't know if it'll help if I pick it up, but they get very small at the end. There's a taper there, and it gets to be a very fine point. And what happens is when you drive it through your veneer and it goes up against, of course can't see it right now, but on the underneath that hoop there is a metal band that runs around the outside of this form. So when the tack comes up against that hard metal band, that little tip clinches over and holds on the back side of the veneer. So now I'm ready to get started putting it on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the valley so that it's on top of one of the inner layer of standards, so that I'm not creating any extra bulk there. So I'm gonna get it lined up. Again, I'm trying to keep it real straight as I go around. I'm gonna put a tack here to hold it. And then I'm actually gonna go about 6 inches before I put another tack in, and the reason is when I finish up, I'm gonna lap for that 6 inches, and I'll just put the other nails in when I get to that point. But there's really no point in putting all of the nails in this one and then putting all of them in on that top layer as well. So I'm gonna skip over to about here, and at this point I'm going to move up and down, so I'm putting some of them in the top of the hoop and some towards the bottom of the hoop, and I'm going to put one in each standard all the way around. And we are cheating a little bit using a drill. Historically, they would not have done that, but they also had a lot more splits and stuff happening, which is what we're trying to avoid by using the drill. So we do use it, and I'm actually just drilling through the one layer of hoop. I don't drill all the way through. If you did, it would not be able to clinch over properly. So I'm just drilling through that top layer of hoop, and then they do fine from there on in. As you might imagine, there were a lot of different ways they did this. Some of them actually used staplers, things like that. Some of them actually had a nailing machine that didn't hammer them in, but it actually just pushed them in very gently rather than hammering them. Some of them may have had different types of automatic nailers and so on, but a lot of them just did it by hand like this. A lot faster than I'm doing. Actually, in the factory where the equipment, the veneer mill that we use to cut these standards, the factory that mill came out of was actually, they primarily made Easter baskets. They made other kinds of things like fruit baskets in the off season for that. But the ladies that worked at that factory making those baskets were well known for putting entire handfuls of these tacks in their mouths, and then they would just spit them out as they needed them and put them in. I can't imagine doing that. Sounds painful and poor tasting, but they're it's been documented. It's not just rumor. They really did it. It's true. And they were tougher than me. So you can see that the pattern I'm doing is one at the top, one at the bottom, about in the middle of each standard. So they're going to be spaced between 1.5 inches and 2 inches around the whole thing. And of course, by moving back and forth like that, it makes it less likely to split since I'm staggering them. And it also is going to provide a lot more strength rather than if you had them all in the middle or all at the top or the bottom. in any case. So I'm going to continue around and I'll show you how we finish them up. Right here is where I'm starting to get into that spot where the inner hoop was overlapped, which means I need to go to the next length up in tacks for this little stretch to make sure I'm getting through all those layers, so again, so it can clinch properly. Really have to make sure you have the correct length tack for whatever thickness veneer you're going through, because if it's short enough it won't go through all the way, so it won't clinch properly, and if it is too long it won't be tight because it can only clinch so far, basically the way those tacks are designed. So it might go through and it might clinch, but if you have a longer tack than necessary, it's not going to hold everything tight together and it can make it really loose and kind of wiggle around. Just getting to the end here, so again I'm going to trim off the other end of my hoop. And again, since we are at the spot where they're overlapping, I'm going to switch back to my longer tacks. Alright, top hoop is all done, and now we'll start looking to do the bottom. A little bit of a rainy day today, and the cows are all hanging out here on the hillside, so we get to watch them out the window while we're working. Another thing I wanted to point out is there's a what we call right side and a wrong side of the veneer. And you can see these are all curved inward, which is how they were on the log, of course. As we take off the veneer, if you can envision it, this bottom side was the inside of the log and the side was towards the outside. Now the inside is actually smoother than the outside, and we usually, on most of the baskets, face them so that that inside piece is facing outward. But this basket is a little bit different, so we've got it going that way. But I actually did do that on the top hoop. Well, I will do it on both hoops, where that inside, the smoother side, is facing out. For the bottoms, we use white pine. These are some boards that we cut out on our sawmill, cut them to length, and then we used a jig on the bandsaw to cut them into a circle. And we have our hole in the center, because that's how we hold them onto the form for this type of basket. They're about 9 3/4 inches in diameter, about 3/4 of an inch thick. Then that fits onto our center rod here that ran up through the form. Have this block on there to help hold it straight so it can't wiggle too much. And our next step is to suck all these standards down in and hold them so that I can put this next hoop on. Now we've tried this a few different ways at this point. We're actually trying something a little bit different today. We're still very much in the prototype stage of this basket, figuring out the best way to do it and everything. So hopefully we can do them a little bit more quickly and easily in the future. But so what we're going to try today is with these hook things that we have that go into the top of the form. We've got 3 of them around it. And the idea is we're now going to get a piece of nylon rope or something like that and have it in the hook so that it can't slide down. That'll hold it halfway up the basket, and then we can cinch it down to pull the standards tight to the bottom and hold it there while I do the bottom hoop. So we'll see how that works. While I'm waiting for Dad to come back, just thought I would show you some of the older baskets that we're modeling these after. So these two are very similar. Obviously, they're a little bit different from what we're doing in a few different ways. They didn't do the double row of standards, and they actually cut their standards so that they are tapered. You'll notice the gap there is relatively uniform all the way down through because the standards themselves are tapered. The problem you get into with only doing that first layer of standards, one of the issues that can cause is that it won't stay as straight. It can tend to want to twist a little bit. So one of the ways they have overcome that is by putting these cross braces on. They've got 3 crosses around the basket. They've also got these wires in the middle, which was to keep the baskets from bulging out once they're full of produce. You can see on these ones they did use nails. As I mentioned, you know, some different outfits use staples and things like that, but they did use nails on this one. And the bottoms also are not all one piece on these. These are 2 pieces that look like they were tongue and grooved to fit together, so that they didn't necessarily need a wide board to do that. This is actually the first one we made, the first one we tried to do. Worked pretty well. We did decide to change a couple things. I had mentioned we were starting with the bottom and then going to the top. We also, most recently, they made the bottom a little bit wider. You can see there's not quite as much taper on that one as this one, and also added this middle hoop for the same kind of reason as the wire on these older ones. Alright, so we've got a piece of twine here, tied a loop in the one end. So we're going to go around and make sure we're on all 3 of our hooks. Put it through and see how cinching it down goes. Are we gonna soak it at all? Wet it?
No.
Okay. One of the challenges with this has been having one side suck in more than the other and ending up a little bit lopsided, so hopefully this is going to help with it.
Quite strong enough, is it?
Looks that way. Well, the twine didn't quite work out, but fortunately we also have some broom making stuff, including this twine for the brooms, which should be a fair amount stouter, so I'm going to try a piece of it. Alright, we're going to try that again, and I also got enough this time to go around twice, which should make it a little bit easier in theory, so let's see. Alright, now we're ready to put our bottom hoop on, and since we aren't going through veneer and then empty space, so the nails don't need to clinch over, so we don't need to use those small cut nails since we're going into our solid wood bottom. So I'm using a different kind of nail for this. It's actually just a wire type nail does not have that special little end to clinch over. About 1 inch long. So get started on that. Our hoop for the bottom is a little bit narrower, obviously shorter because we have a smaller diameter. And clipped up. And it really doesn't matter where we start on the bottom. I'm just gonna make sure none of our standards are tripled up. Should be about good. So just start right here. Again, I'm going to just put that one to hold it, and then I'm going to skip 6 inches or so since I'm going to overlap when I come back around. Then I'm going to put one in each standard, and I'm going to make sure I'm holding my hoop really tight, especially here at the start, because our string in the middle helps here a lot, but the standards still want to flex it out just a little bit, so I'm going to make sure I'm good and tight before I drill my hole there. Doing my best to keep the bottom of the hoop flush with the bottom of the basket, which gets a little bit tricky in a spot like this where the standards actually stick down below the bottom a little bit. So I'm just going to try to make sure I'm keeping it at the same, about the same level as the actual bottom of the basket. And where those standards stick out a little bit, we'll sand those down after. When we get to the end of hoop, we will typically put 2 very close to the end to help hold it. In this case, I can't go too high up because remember our bottom's only about 3/4 of an inch thick and this hoop is about a full inch thick. So I'm gonna have to make sure I'm a little bit careful on my top one so that I'm not going into nothing. So now we're ready to go ahead and take it off the form. Still have a couple things to do to finish up, but we're done with the form for now. now it's time to do our middle hoop. So what we've done is we measured the circumference of the bottom, the circumference of the top, and we made a hoop, pre-made, pre-glued and nailed together, that is about halfway between those two circumferences. So now all I have to do is get it down to where we like it, to where it's you know, about even all the way around. We don't want to crook it, of course. So I might grab a tape just to check on that a little bit. That's about where we want it, right? Alright, not perfect, but pretty good. So now what I can do, since because of the taper of the standards, and of course our hoop is not tapered, that means there's a little bit of a gap from this underside, which means I'm just going to drop some hot glue right down in there to fasten it, and do that a little bit all the way around. And for some reason, camera was not filming when I thought it was just now when I did that, but anyway, you can see there's just a few spots around here where I put that hot glue right down in there. It's going to hold it in, and when you actually look at it straight from the side, of course you can't see it. So maybe a half a dozen places around it. Hold it, and there it is. Alright, so here's the one we just did. The main only real difference between that and the last one is our middle hoop here was an inch shorter in circumference than this one, which made it sit, you know, just a little bit lower on the basket and didn't do quite as much to straighten the standards as that one did. Still got a little bit more of a curve to it there, but turned out good. Got it all sanded and nice. Before I ended out the video, just wanted to bring you up here and show you the type of baskets that we normally make, because this is the kind of stuff that we've made for years, actual woven baskets. We primarily use the maple, some of which we dye to get our different colors and whatnot. We do sometimes use cherry for the standards like this, which provides some really pretty contrast, but my family, has been making these for a lot of years. There's a pretty big variety of the different sizes and styles that we've made. Everything from those little baskets to these big hampers and laundry baskets. We also have a setup for making these cheese boxes, which I have shown in videos in the past, and I plan to do a more in-depth video of that at some point, along with hopefully more in-depth video showing the veneer mill and a little bit more explanation as to how it works and that sort of thing. But it really is a very versatile craft, a lot of variety that we're able to do with it, with the different materials, and it's really a lot of fun to work with this old machinery that's still you know, that's still operating so well, even though it's well over 100 years old, the veneer mills and that, and to still be able to use that to create, you know, beautiful baskets like this is really pretty cool. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you've made it this far, we really appreciate the support, and if you enjoy this kind of thing, working demonstrations and showing how we actually use these antique machinery and farm implements and things like that, then please check our channel out, because we do a lot of these kinds of videos and we would love to have you. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.